Thank you all for joining Zowe V2 LTS CLI office hours. Michael Bauer, I'm the Zowe CLI squad lead. So with that, let's jump in to what you need to know about Zowe V2 LTS, especially as it pertains to Zowe CLI. So the agenda for today, first we'll talk about Zowe V2 LTS at a high level, what you need to know, about the releases, about the conformance program, about how you can get the technology and when you can get the technology. We'll then talk about one new asset that's available on the Zowe doc site we call the ecosystem web help. And then we'll dive into the new features for Zowe CLI in V2. These features include concepts known as team configuration, automatic team configuration, Daemon mode, which significantly improves the performance of the Zowe CLI. The Zowe CLI is now secure by default. We'll talk more about what that means in detail later on. And then also how you can easily migrate to the V2 LTS release if you're currently on the V1 LTS release. Provide some resources and links that you can check out. Again, as Rose mentioned, this will be posted to zowe.org/vnext. So you'll be able to access this presentation and click the links then. And then wrap it up with some Q&A. And again, if anyone has questions throughout, feel free to just come off mute and ask away. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what's coming soon with Zowe V2 LTS, but I want to touch a little bit on this just briefly. You may be aware that we had a Zowe V1 LTS conformance program. In fact, we also had a 2019 conformance program before we went to V1 LTS. When extenders apply for conformance, they apply for a specific technology, such as the API mediation layer, app framework, CLI, or Zowe Explorer for Visual Studio Code, and a particular release level, whether that was releases 1.0 to 1.8 in the 2019 conformance program, or Zowe 1.9 to current in the V1 LTS conformance program. They will now be applying for V2 conformance. So you'll be looking for a new page on the Open Mainframe project site that shows the new V2 LTS conformant applications. And you'll be able to consume those as well as the V2 LTS release after the GA date, which is targeted for April 25th, 2022. As we talk about new releases, I just want to quickly touch on the life cycle of each long-term support release. A long-term support release has a lifetime of 4.5 years. It spends the first 2 years in an active LTS phase. During this active LTS phase, it can accept minor enhancements as well as security fixes and critical bug fixes. And then it transitions into a 2.5-year maintenance period. During that period, it will only receive critical bug fixes and security fixes. So for example, we're announcing that V2 LTS is becoming active, but at the same time, V1 LTS is transitioning into maintenance phase. So it'll no longer be receiving minor enhancements, only bug fixes and security fixes. Another note I wanted to mention before jumping into the new features of V2 LTS is we do have ecosystem web help available on the Zowe doc site. You can access it directly at the link provided on this slide, or you can navigate to the Zowe doc site and then scroll to the bottom, and then you'll see ecosystem web help and be able to open it live in your browser. This allows you to view the capabilities of the Zowe CLI and Zowe CLI conformant plugins without having to install anything. So for example, if you were interested in what was available in, for example, here we have the CA View plugin or the Endeavor plugin, you could quickly navigate through this help and see what commands are available in detail. Okay, jumping into what's new with Zowe V2 LTS. So if you were on Zowe V1 LTS, you may be familiar with the typical user journey, which is that after I install the software, I typically will create a profile, which contains my session information to connect to a particular service. For example, if I want to connect to ZOSMF in order to list data sets, I need to know the host of ZOSMF, I need to know the port of ZOSMF and basically how to connect it, figure out how to manage my credentials. And I need to do that for every service that I'm connecting to. We found a couple problems with that. when we were validating this with the community and what we saw after we released it to the community. One was that, it was really difficult to roll out across the team or organization. And we found that to be the case for two reasons. One is that the commands were difficult to enter. And two is that the information is likely not known by everybody within the organization. For example, not everybody necessarily knows what port each web service is running on. In addition, it was also difficult to use those profiles as part of a pipeline. For example, if you were using Jenkins to run some automation against ZOS environments, you'd have to typically recreate those profiles as part of your scripting logic. We've transformed that experience so that now we can allow one person at a site or one person in a project to create a single configuration file and then easily share that with everyone within our organization or within their team. And here on this slide, we just have some details about how that initial flow would work. So once you install the CLI, you could run a Zowe config init command, which would generate a template Zowe config JSON file and a Zowe schema JSON file. The importance of the Zowe schema JSON file here is that when we're editing the config.json file in Visual Studio Code, it will provide IntelliSense when we're editing that. So it provides a little bit of an easier experience when you're having to edit configuration information rather than having to type all this information on a command line where you don't really have much help like autocomplete or things like that. After the administrator is satisfied with the configuration file, they can host that in a shared location, and then each user at their site can import that configuration file and start running commands. There's also a few advanced use cases for team configuration in that, one, if a user wanted to override information in that shared config, they can do so. They would just have to edit values in a Zowe config user JSON. Now, not necessarily every site will find a need to use that capability, but it is there if you need it. In addition, you can also store configuration in a project. So typically, well, today when you're running CLI commands, your profiles apply to you no matter where you're running those commands. But you could also have config within a project where that config only pertains to commands run within that project. This is very helpful if you're writing CI automation for particular projects, because you can easily just change which GitHub project or what project you're working in, and the systems you're running that automation against will change for you. What we saw a lot with V1 profiles is that folks would be changing their default profiles all the time, and maybe they'd forget to change one or something like that. This allows you to store your environment information as part of your project, so you can easily just switch context. We set out to make this even easier with automatic team configuration. So the remaining problem after we came up with team configuration is it was still challenging for those few people to set this up. And we thought, how could we make this better? Well, we decided we would leverage the Zowe API mediation layer to automatically create the Zowe config JSON. So if you do have the Zowe API mediation layer rolled out, all you will have to do as an administrator is run a Zowe config auto init command, provide the connection details of just the API mediation layer, so just that single service, and then it'll gather all the information for connecting to services through it. And then the experience from there on is the same. The admin just hosts this single file in a shared location, users grab it, and then those users can just immediately get value from the technology. They don't have to spend cycles, setting up configuration information. We also set out in Zowe V2 to improve the performance of the CLI. We wanted to make commands respond more instantaneously. And we were able to achieve this by implementing a feature known as Daemon mode. This is built in. This is built into the core CLI. So all you do is after you acquire the Zowe V2 LTS version of CLI, you see on the left here, you just run a Zowe daemon enable command. If this is your first time running Zowe daemon enable command, it will tell you to add a specific value to your path. Once you add that to your path, you can start running Zowe commands. The first Zowe command you run, it'll start a background process, and then subsequent commands will leverage that background process, and it makes command response times very, very small, right? So it's very, very quick. And as you can see in the GIF here, that I'm running 5 or 6 Zowe files list commands, and they're coming back nearly instantaneously. This is even faster for local commands such as help. So if you experience any performance issues when you're not using daemon mode, I definitely recommend trying it out. And we also have secure by default, which means that in Zowe V1 LTS out of the box for the core CLI package, if you wanted to store configuration information such as credentials, those would be stored in plain text in your config. But we did offer a secure credential store plugin that you could install and then store those in your operating system's secure credential vault. Rather than a separate plugin, in V2 LTS, this is part of the core package. Just to ensure everybody's following best practices for storing credentials if they choose to do so. They'll have that out of the box. So no longer is there a secure credential store plugin for V2 LTS, it is just core functionality. And if you want to get started with V2 LTS, you would just install the solution. Today, we don't have the Zowe V2 LTS tag on the marketplace. That'll be coming just before the 25th of April. Today we're using the next tag. So you can do an npm install-g @zoe/cli @next, just like you would do today with @zoe v1 LTS, just change that tag. And then when you're installing plugins, it's the same way. Just like you're installing v1 LTS plugins @zoe v1 LTS, you'll install v2 plugins @zoe v2 LTS. And once you have everything installed that you want, you can easily migrate your existing profiles to V2 team configuration by running the Zowe config convert profiles command. As you can see here, the command will tell you how many old profiles it found that were on Zowe V1, and it will tell you if you had the secure credential store installed. If you did, it will uninstall it. You'll still have the same functionality, but it is now just part of core. And it'll ask you to continue. If you continue it, and then it'll go through the operation. So it'll uninstall the secure credential store plugin, and then it'll tell you which sets of profiles it converted. And we've also taken into account, based on your feedback from our Zowe iteration reviews, that if you had existing automation that was leveraging profiles like --zosmf -profile and a specific name, that automation will just continue to run. You can run this convert profiles command, make sure you're satisfied. Once you're satisfied, you could rerun the command with the --delete flag, which will delete all the old profiles and remove all the old credentials. When you run this, like it's shown on the screen today, we kind of back everything up for you just in case you have a desire to revert. You would be able to do so as well. So I think that covers pretty much all the key points of Zowe V2 LTS. You have the option to leverage team configuration. And I do want to be complete and mention you could stay on V1 profiles. We don't necessarily recommend it. It's not as easy to roll out across your organization. But if you had existing automation leveraging V1 profiles, you were hesitant to upgrade to V2 profiles immediately, you could defer that for a period of time. If you're having trouble with the performance of the Zowe CLI, highly recommend trying out the daemon mode feature. You're now secure by default, and we provided the details on how to upgrade to the V2 LTS release. I think that covers everything I wanted to share with you today. And here are some resources related to how to get started. Again, you can try out the software by downloading it on zoe.org/download. You can check out our docs on how to get started, as well as our Medium blog site on some of the use cases I described here, like getting started with team config or leveraging daemon mode. So with that, I'll just open it up to Q&A and see if there's anyone has any questions.
Hey, Rose, I'll ask a question.
Sure.
It's Milt. So how does this impact Code for Z? So is the, like the security and stuff, is that, is there going to be a rollout of quote V2 under Code for Z, or how does that work? I don't know if that was maybe off topic for this discussion, but I'd ask.
Sure, and I can follow up with you more offline, Neil. But I believe the VS Code solutions are looking to leverage team config, and that's being mostly completed through the Zowe Explorer.
Oh,
So
okay.
a lot of that may be presented next Wednesday on
Okay.
that
Yep.
office hours. But we look to allow team configuration to be used by all Visual Studio Code extensions. For example, today
Oh, cool.
I
Yep.
mentioned rolling out this team config across the board in organization. Yesterday, for example, internally, I was able to give somebody a config JSON file, and then they were able to just start using Zowe CLI and Zowe Explorer and VS Code and all those things without having to go through the trouble of figuring out, what host CLSMF was running on or something like that.
Oh, right. No, that's awesome. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. Have a great day.